everybody. My name is Ron Deutsch, and I'm the Executive Director of New Yorkers for Fiscal Fairness, one of the coordinators of the Omnibus Consortium. There are many groups with us here today: the New Roosevelt Initiative, the League of Women Voters, Alliance for Quality Education, Balcony, AFSCME, Statewide Senior Action, NYSET, Citizen Action, Trend, Tax Nightmare, New York State Property Tax Reform Coalition, Fiscal Policy Institute, and Assemblywoman Barbara Lifton is here. Some of her colleagues were trying to make it, but many had committee meetings and were unable to get here. But many have expressed their unending support of the circuit breaker as well. So we're here today because the debate that's been going on in Albany around property tax issues has been awfully one-sided. All the discussion centers around a tax cap. Many of us here don't believe the tax cap is the answer to the property tax woes of New York State residents. We think the problem is that there are hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers that are paying double-digit percentages of their income in property taxes right now, and that is what's unsustainable. The only thing that's going to address that problem is, in fact, a circuit breaker. And a circuit breaker is a mechanism that basically limits people's property taxes to a certain percentage of their income. It's a way to make sure that seniors on fixed incomes, people who have lost their jobs, people who have been in their homes for long periods of time aren't forced out because they can't afford to pay their property taxes. So while many politicians, in particular Governor Cuomo, have been really pushing hard for a property tax cap, we think this discussion needs to be much broader than it currently is. Just because we don't necessarily agree with the property tax cap doesn't mean we are against property tax reform. In fact, we think we're the group that's for property tax relief and reform. A circuit breaker provides relief. A tax cap does not. So let's be very clear about that. Most people in New York State want relief. And I know many of you will point to the fact that 80% of the public supports the tax cap. But I would suggest that many of those people don't really know what a tax cap is or does. I think the majority of people, and you can do interviews on the streets, man on the street interviews if you like, but I think the majority of people won't know that a tax cap is a cap on the levy that can be issued by a school district or a county. When in reality, people, I think, believe that a tax cap is a limit on how much they're going to have to pay in taxes. It does not cap their individual taxes. Only a circuit breaker will do that.
Hi, Karen Sharp, Executive Director of Citizen Action of New York, statewide grassroots organization. As other speakers have said, the tax cap is one more fake Albany quick fix. After severely cutting state school aid and forcing more costs onto local property taxpayers, now the governor and the Senate want to squeeze schools from both directions by capping local taxes. And they want a cap that doesn't even have exemptions or take into account the costs that schools and local governments can't control, like energy costs, healthcare costs, transportation costs. The Albany politicians now want to tie the hands of local schools and governments so they are unable to provide the services that the public wants. The governor and the Senate could have addressed the property tax issue responsibly by stopping tax cuts for millionaires and using the funds to provide necessary state aid and tax relief. Instead, the governor and Senate majority have insisted on tax cuts for the wealthiest New Yorkers who don't need them and haven't asked for them, leaving a heavier burden on working families who are struggling to pay their tax bills. Now they want to pass the blame and the burden onto local governments and schools by passing an unrealistic tax cap. New Yorkers have a right to good schools and good basic public services that local governments now provide. The governor and the Senate should come back, revisit the millionaire's tax, end that tax break, and provide schools and local governments with desperately needed funding. I just want to add that I was especially...
New York State students are guaranteed by the Constitution a right to a sound basic education. At any time the state does anything to impede students of manifesting that opportunity, it's wrong. When the state shifts the responsibility to local communities and fully funding schools, it's wrong. And when they hit it with a property tax, it's a double whammy when it doesn't have any room for exemptions. School districts have costs that are out of their control, such as increased enrollment or special education or transportation. So we're really concerned that the governor has offered a proposal that doesn't allow any exemptions for those costs.
Thank you, Ron. Barbara Bartoletti, I'm Legislative Director for the New York State League of Women Voters. We are a nonpartisan organization. but I am very pleased to be here today. The League, about a decade ago, and many of you who are in this room know that when the League studies something, we do it quite thoroughly and we take our time. And about a decade ago, we came up with a position on the tax circuit breaker. And let me just read you a sentence or two from that. The League of Women Voters of New York State supports implementation of the STAR circuit breaker rather than tax caps as a more effective way to provide, these are the words I want you to focus on, meaningful property tax relief to New Yorkers most in need. A tax cap, while potentially slowing the rate of increase of taxes, would do nothing to provide relief to citizens most stressed by the high property taxes. We oppose implementation of a tax cap without, in other words, you should pay attention to, concomitant implementation of a full and equitable foundation approach to the funding of education. The tax cap will do nothing but devastate these very already poorly funded school districts. And until we have the full implementation of foundation aids, this would have a devastating effect. The circuit breaker, as all of the speakers before me have said, is much more meaningful relief, and we would call on the Senate to come back and take another look at the circuit breaker. We would also encourage the Assembly to bring their colleagues in the Republican Senate along, and we would also encourage the governor to take another look. As one of the speakers said, this is a very simplified explanation which really doesn't get at the problem, and I think this governor is well-meaning and wants to get at the problem. If so, he needs to take another look at the circuit breaker, and we certainly would encourage him to do so. Thank you very much.